Welcome to video number 5. Today we're going to talk about which type of bankruptcy might fit your needs. So when you're talking about choosing the right chapter of bankruptcy, there's some questions that you're going to want to ask yourself about your own situation, such as, are you looking more for a clean slate, like a fresh start, or on the other hand, have you missed some payments that you want to catch up on, like a car or a house, or perhaps a tax bill that you want to stop accruing interest and start making some headway and actually paying it down. You also want to ask yourself about the types of debts that you have. Are they primarily business related or are they personal? And this is something that's not always apparent at first glance. Some people will think that they have a whole bunch of personal debts when in reality it was related to commerce. They were doing business and they've accumulated these debts, and so that is an important factor in determining which chapter you end up filing. Some people might not qualify for the means test because of their income, and this is common with business owners. They may not qualify to file a Chapter 7 if they were personal debts, but if they're all entirely business-related debts, the means test actually, in those cases, doesn't apply most of the times. And again, as we've always said all along, this is not legal advice to your particular situation. So if you're a small business owner and you're facing some debts like this, absolutely contact an attorney. Always consult with a lawyer before making any legal decisions. And then one of the final questions that you want to ask yourself is, what are you trying to accomplish with this bankruptcy? Are you trying to keep an asset like a house, or a car, or alternatively, do you just want to be able to start over, give the asset back, let the bank take the car, let the bank take the house, and move on with your life? These are relevant questions to which chapter. So now let's move into the individual chapters themselves, and we'll kind of do an overview. Now, let's start with Chapter 7 because it's probably the most common chapter people end up filing. Chapter 7 is often called a straight bankruptcy or a liquidation. The idea is that we're just going to wipe everything out, start over, fresh starts, clean slate, and what we're going to see if we have any assets that can be sold to satisfy those debts, and if not, then we're just simply stating, look, I have no assets, I'm insolvent, I can't pay my debts back, so we're just going to call everything done and over with and move forward, and that's called a discharge. Now, most people typically only have what's called exempt property. This is one of the most common questions people have is, I think they're going to come in and take my furniture and my clothes and everything, and that bankruptcy is not like that. They have already put in place rules to help protect certain things that are necessary for you to live. They understand you need clothes, you need furniture. There's even laws that protect things like your equity in your home up to a certain amount. And all of these things are called exemptions, and there's something that any knowledgeable bankruptcy lawyer is going to be able to educate you on and talk to you about your personal situation so that you understand what you own that is either exempt or non-exempt and would be subject to being sold to try and help pay for any of your creditors. And again, those exemptions vary by state. So, here in Utah, we have different sets of exemptions than you might find in California or Colorado or any other states. Now, in plain English, the majority of people who file a Chapter 7 never have anything that the court can take. It's important to remember also that Chapter 7 eliminates the debt completely, but it doesn't get rid of the creditor's right to their collateral. So don't mistake your legal obligation to pay a debt with their legal obligation to take and sell collateral. So, the best example of that is like a car. Just because you filed bankruptcy, they still have a right to go get the collateral and take it back unless you work something out, some kind of an arrangement with them to pay the debt. Times when Chapter 7 makes sense. If you have really large balances, you owe, like medical bills, for example, that you just cannot possibly repay based on your current situation. Credit card debt, garnishments, judgments, deficiency judgments. This is common. A lot of times you'll have a car that was repossessed and they come back after the deficiency. They come back and say, well, we want the difference that we didn't obtain. Okay? That might be an opportunity where Chapter 7 makes a lot of sense, because the last thing you want is to pay back this huge debt on a car you don't even own anymore. If your debts are substantially more than your assets, okay, you have $500,000 in debt and $100,000 in assets, there's a real good chance that you need to be looking at bankruptcy, because you're, by definition, insolvent. And if you need to temporarily stop a foreclosure, a repossession, something where your income would allow you to catch up, but you just need a quick little temporary break, a Chapter 7 might make sense in those circumstances, because a lot of times it isn't the house or the car that's the problem, it's all the credit cards, it's all the other debts like medical debts or whatever. If those weren't there, you could pay the car, you could pay the house. So if you're current on those things, or you have a way to work out a payment plan with the creditor, it might make sense to do a Chapter 7. Now, let's overview a Chapter 13. Okay? Chapter 13 is often called a personal reorganization, a payment plan, or a repayment plan. Okay? A plan is put together by you and your attorney, and then it's approved by the court, that allows you to make payments on debts that have fallen behind. Okay? You're not typically making payments on principal balances, but you're making payments, like, for example, on a house. Let's say you've missed 6 payments. Those 6 payments would be put into this plan in the Chapter 13, and that's what you would make payments on. You would also, at the same time, make your regular house payment. So, that is something to consider. If you're doing a Chapter 13 to stop a foreclosure, it's important to realize that you're going to have to make a bigger payment than you're normally used to make. You're going to have to make the house payment and your trustee payment, which they figure that out over a period of either 3 or 5 years. Okay, so if you're behind $10,000, you can do the math really easy. Divide that by 36 months or 60 months, and there you'll know about how much extra you're going to have to be paying in addition to your house payment. Now, in a Chapter 13, these plans can be set up to repay anywhere from 0 to 100% of the money owed to unsecured debts. All right, let me give you an example. You might have a $10,000 credit card, and let's say that your income is such that you can only afford to pay back in 5 years 10% of that balance, or $1,000. That's how much you'd pay back in a 10% plan. And this is something that your bankruptcy attorney would figure out and help you figure out, is by taking your income and comparing it to how much income is left over every month after you've paid all of your necessities. Let's talk about when a Chapter 13 makes sense. If you have a pending foreclosure or a repossession, let's say your wages are being garnished, okay, but you have good income, it's just that you've gotten so far behind that you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, all these things are hitting you at once and you can't get your feet back under you. This is the time that a Chapter 13 might make a lot of sense, because it allows you to take a deep breath, gather yourself, and start making payments again to your creditors. If you make enough money that, if you just had a little bit of breathing room, you could manage to pay everybody back, a 13 is probably the most logical choice for you. If you have valuable assets, let's say that you have like a gun collection, I've seen that before, or some kind of valuable asset like a stock portfolio that's not exempt. There are some retirement accounts that are exempt, like IRAs, but just a regular stock portfolio might not be. And you might say, well, I certainly don't want them liquidating my retirement account or my stock portfolio to sell all these things, so I'm going to go ahead and get into a 13 so I can pay everybody back and make sure everything I own stays intact. If here's a good example. This one may not happen a lot, but it's nice to know that it's there. We had a client recently who came in. They had, their financial situation was really actually pretty good. They didn't have a whole lot of debt in terms of like credit cards and things like that. They have good income, but they have this motorhome that they purchased, and they owe about $85,000 on the motorhome, and right now it's worth $50,000, and the payments on it are killing them. And there's been, they've lost some hours, and there's been some things that have changed in their personal life to where it doesn't make sense for them to continue. It's a poor financial decision for them to continue paying on that. Well, they ended up filing a bankruptcy, not because they had anything that they were trying to pay back, but because they wanted to avoid the deficiency judgment on that motorhome. They wanted to make sure that they could simply give back the collateral to the creditor and say, here you go, now there's no future damages, no recourse, nothing that can come back to haunt us. We can move on with our lives. Okay, now, I can't stress enough how important the actual payment plan is in your Chapter 13, okay? It's probably, next to which attorney you choose, it's probably the most important aspect of your bankruptcy, because your plan is going to make or break whether or not you are successful. And believe me, there's a lot of people who end up in these plans that end up failing. They'll miss a payment, pretty soon the trustee dismisses their case, and now they're in a position where their creditors are coming after them again, even though they thought that it was all behind them. So I suppose maybe they kind of go hand in hand, choosing an attorney and how your plan's worked out, because you want an attorney who's sharp and on the ball, that does your plan correctly, and makes sure that if you need to be in a 10% plan paying back your creditors, that you're not in an 80% plan that you're likely to fail. And here's a little warning about unscrupulous attorneys that are out there. I've seen this personally, and so I know it happens, and I'm not saying that's common, but there are lawyers out there who set people up to fail. They put them into a Chapter 13 with a really high payment plan. And why? Because it ends up netting them fees. And then when they fail, they recommend, well, let's just do a Chapter 7 if you can't pay your debts. It's something that's quite despicable, but it has happened, and I think you ought to be aware of it, just so you can keep a heads up about you when you're interviewing lawyers and seeing who you want to go with.